Listen up. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to the podcast participants, and not to any participant's employer, organization, committee, or other group or individual. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. You know, for fun. So lighten up and enjoy. Stomping Jen.
Sawtooth Frank.
Welcome once again to the Soft Serve podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I don't have to have you. You're a co-host.
Okay.
You're here. But I'm still going to welcome you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really excited for this conversation.
I am too.
It's like almost like a sequel to a previous conversation we had. We're talking to Therese Schecter, who is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, and founder of the feminist production company Trixie Films. All right. Therese is here to talk to us about a film, a documentary we talked about previously on this podcast called My So-Called Selfish Life.
I love that title.
Yeah, we talked to somebody who appeared in that film.
Right.
Our friend and periodic guest on the podcast, Chanel Dubofsky.
Yes.
Right, all about this film she appeared in, which is about women who are child-free by choice.
Right.
I'm excited because we have the person who made this movie here.
I'm excited.
So we get to ask a lot of questions and hear more about this.
Cool.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you sure?
Yes, I was born ready.
Really?
That was a joke.
Oh,
It was a terrible joke.
All right, here we go. The Soft Serve Podcast. Creamy, delicious ideas without the creepy truck. Stomping Jen.
Gonna sing to
You
me.
have been shutting down my singing lately, as though you do not enjoy it.
Huh. I wonder why that might be.
Huh.
Huh.
We'll have to unpack that at a different time.
Alrighty.
Let's say hello to Therese Shechter. Hello, Therese.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here to talk with us about your film, My So-Called Selfish Life. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you very much. I was a bit under the weather earlier this week, but I'm feeling good now. So
Good.
Well, I'm hoping it wasn't the coronavirus.
No.
Okay.
I know people are...
As far as I know, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, people around us are like, they get like a little bit of sniffles now or some sore throat, and everybody's really anxious
The first
about that.
question you have is, do you have the
Do you
Rona?
have the Rona?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get my booster next week,
good.
Stomping Jen, so you don't need to worry about me.
For sure.
So, Therese, I tried to give the Cliff Notes version sort of who you are and what you do. So I just want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit more if you wanted to.
Well, I'm a director, producer, writer, I guess. I'm a very independent documentary filmmaker. This is my third feature-length documentary. I've done a bunch of shorts also. I like to describe my work as challenging what we consider most sacred about womanhood. That's kind of my mission. So motherhood fits into that quite well, into that mission statement. And I am child-free. It's something I've been thinking about my whole life, honestly, but didn't quite have the language to express it out loud until not that long ago, actually. I don't know. I like doing these documentaries because I like talking about how women are being lied to almost constantly about what our lives are supposed to be like.
Yeah.
So I get a lot of joy from telling people they're being lied to.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And before we dive into your film, My So-Called Selfish Life, and the topic of women being child-free by choice, tell us a little bit about how you got into filmmaking.
Yeah, sure. This is my second career. I went to art school. I was a graphic designer for quite a long time. I worked at the Chicago Tribune for 10 years. And while I was there, I was having like a not quite midlife crisis. And I decided I didn't want to do that job for the rest of my life. And I went to film school part-time while I was working full-time. I didn't know what I wanted to do with that, but I just really wanted to go to film school. And while I was there, I learned about editing and producing and making films. It was all on 16 millimeter film. And we were editing like by hand with this like motorized thing. So that was way behind what actual professionals were doing, by the way. Oh, but that's what we learned on. And I had a very nebulous idea of what I wanted to do, but on a whim almost, I applied for an internship, I guess, at Tribeca Films in New York, which is Robert De Niro's production company. And they took me.
Oh, wow.
So I got a leave of absence from work. I was in a managerial position, by the way. So I got a 4-month leave of absence to move to New York to become an intern. And that's awesome. I was thrilled because, when you're a manager, I had like 17 people in my department or something. Yeah. It was such a relief not to be anyone's boss for a while and just do like really menial things all day. While I was there, I got hired to be a production assistant on one of their films. By the time the 4 months were over, or probably actually after about 2 months, I realized I don't actually want to go back to Chicago and I don't actually want to go back to that job. And I resigned over the phone.
Oh, wow.
Which, I loved that job. Let me just say, I loved it. And even though I loved it, I still didn't want to go back to it. I wanted to stay in New York and see where this led.
Was that oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, was that a scary thing to do?
In retrospect, yeah, probably. But at the time, I felt kind of brave. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I'm probably not going to feel this brave again. So I need to take advantage of this moment because if I wait even 10 minutes longer, I'm going to change my mind. So it was scary and it was difficult. Tribeca offered me a job and I worked there for a year as the assistant to Robert De Niro's producing partner, actually. At this point, 20 years out, I can say it was a horrible job. Horrible. If you've ever seen Swimming with Sharks, starring, what's his name? Kevin Spacey. It's about an assistant working for a film producer. Oh. I couldn't watch that film because it was so triggering to me. But anyway, I did it for a year.
Yeah.
And then I was still doing, I could still do graphic design work because, I was like a year out of graphic design work. And I left that job I was sort of fired in the friendliest way. She fired her assistants, basically. But in the meantime, someone who worked there said, "Oh, you should really go volunteer at the Sundance Film Festival." And I said, "Oh, I didn't know anyone could do that." And she said, "Yeah, you should go. You'll like it." And I did. And I'd never thought of documentary filmmaking as a thing that I would ever be interested in, to be honest, because I had a pretty narrow vision of what documentary filmmaking was. Very serious, very sad, very, cliche kind of stuff, really. Yeah. And I went to Sundance and I saw the most incredible documentaries I had ever seen in every possible style. And yeah, it kind of blew open my possibilities. And I came back. I was working, doing freelance design and also taking a course, a documentary workshop, basically. While I was there, we had to create a proposal for a documentary. Nothing that anyone would expect us to make. It was just to go through the process of creating a proper proposal. And so while I was working on that, my professor, who I was also interning for, actually said, "You're going to make this film, right?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to make this film. I don't know how to make documentaries. I'm just doing this assignment." And he said, "No, you should really make this film." And he convinced me I should at least borrow his camera and do some interviews. And this was this became my first documentary. I Was a Teenage Feminist.
And that is the first in what I've learned is sort of a trilogy of documentary films. The second one is called How to Lose Your Virginity and Stomping Jen. This third one is My So-Called Selfish Life.
Was it intended? Well, it sounds like you weren't even sure about the first one. So did you know you were going to make a trilogy?
I didn't really. And if I end up making another one, I have to sort of rethink the whole plan.
Yeah.
It'll be like one of those Douglas Adams trilogies.
Yeah, I was to say a quadrilogy.
What's a quadrilogy?
That's 4 movies.
A quintilogy.
That's 5.
Let's keep going.
Yeah. So, Therese, that film, check me on my dates. I Was a Teenage Feminist came out in 2005. You started your production company, Trixie Films, in 2001. Did you start that production company as a way to get the film made?
Yeah, I decided, and by the way, because I was interning for Mackie Alston, who's the documentary filmmaker, like I learned a lot just interning about like business and how you set up things and all the things you have to do while you're making a documentary that have nothing to do with being creative or shooting
all the businessy side.
All the business stuff. And it seemed like I should just find make a production company. So I did that while I was in my first year working on the film, maybe. Got a website. Also, it's good for tax purposes.
Yeah.
Pro tip, everyone. And I liked the logo. I wanted that image, the Trixie Films logo. I had used it in animation in film school, and I really liked her, and so I made her my logo.
Did you design her? I'm assuming you probably
I
did.
No, I did. Well, I didn't design her. She came from a book of old advertising art.
Oh, okay.
And every once in a while, I see her somewhere because someone else has taken the same old advertising art image and made it like the logo for their restaurant or something. And it's always kind of exciting to see her somewhere else. So I didn't design her, but I designed her milieu, I guess.
Got it.
Yep. And what was I Was a Teenage Feminist about?
I Was a Teenage Feminist grew out of me approaching 40 and feeling like, I was single, I didn't have kids, I did not look like a supermodel, and having this weird thing where I just felt like I had just failed at womanhood. I just hadn't figured it out or gotten anything right. And I was sort of thinking about that and thinking about how when I was a teenager, when I was like 13, I saw Free to Be You and Me, which I don't know if you're familiar with Free to Be You and Me, but it's a classic work of feminist music and animation and things like that. It's amazing.
Okay.
Because I know I can swear here. I'm going to say it's fucking amazing.
Let me give you one of these. We reward profanity here.
Oh, we do?
Thanks.
Okay.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, it was an amazing show. And it was truly feminist. It came out in the 70s. And I remember that it really kind of changed my view of the world when I was a teenager, actually. But it was okay not to get married and all of these things. So I remember I was looking back and I said, what happened to the feminism that was blazing within me in my teenage years? Like, where had it gone and could I find it again? That was kind of the beginning of that film.
Do you now, with some hindsight, know the answer to that question? What happened to the feminism that was blazing in you as a teenager? Did you answer that question?
I didn't really answer that question, but I definitely reconnected with those ideas. I think what happened is one thing that happened to a lot of people, which is the 80s and the hyper conservatism and the incredibly concerted effort to stamp out any gains that women had made in the 60s and 70s. So in terms of the environment of the world, and especially North America, that happened. And feminism became a dirty word. And I mean, it was just a very concerted effort to make that happen. But also, I live in this world and I get all the pop culture messages everybody else does. And I got all the messages that are like, you must get married and have children and you must look a certain way and act a certain way. And, we're all in the same like soup. I think it was a combination of those two things, which may ultimately just be the same thing. But yeah. I think that's kind of what happened. And I think by the time I was turning 40, I realized that actually turning 40 was awesome. And, that thing about like not giving any fucks. I think when you turn 40 is like when that gets activated, right? Yeah. So you give less and less fucks as you go through. And it started there. I was like, you know what? I don't really care about this stuff so much. And making the film helped. I don't like to imply that making a documentary is like my form of therapy or anything, but it is a very creative prod to explore things that are not just happening to me, but happening to a lot of people, and looking at why that's happening, sort of through my lens to some extent, but also through the lens of other people that are grappling.
Yeah, and so we want people to go watch that film. I Was a Teenage Feminist, and then your second documentary, kind of in this, what we're thinking of as a trilogy, was How to Lose Your Virginity, and that was in 2013. Can you tell us a little bit about that film?
Yeah. So that film was inspired by the abstinence until marriage programs of the 2000s, which are still going on, but that George Bush becoming president gave it a real big boost, lots of money. And those were these programs that basically did not teach sex education, but rather taught abstinence, which is like, don't have sex. If you have sex, you're going to go to hell, especially you girls, because you're asking for it. And we're not going to tell you anything about contraception because you don't need it because you're not going to have sex. So yeah. So anyway, that was one of those things where like, why are we lying to teenagers about this? And actually, I was working with my producing partner, Lisa Esselstein, and we started to do a film about sex education. But we started doing these interviews, and every time the subject of virginity came up, it was so fascinating. And it was what we just seemed most interested in every single interview. And so the film really became a look at the mythology and the misogyny around this concept of virginity for women, young women, and sort of how we judge women based on their sexual histories.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, and I can, in my mind, that film probably served as a lightning rod for a lot of people. What was the reaction like to it?
The reaction, I mean, I'm going to say overall it was really good. I did a lot of college screenings with that film, which is like my favorite thing to do, actually. And people would come up to me with their abstinence pledge cards, their purity pledge cards that they had been carrying around with them since they were 12. Yeah. And they showed them to me. And I remember one young college student said, you make me feel like I'm not dirty anymore, which is
That's powerful.
Wow. Yeah. So I think that I mean, it was very well received in some quarters, and on the other hand, I couldn't show it to any high school students. I couldn't get into a high school to show it. So, a lot of the things that I was sort of concerned about kind of played out in how I was able to distribute the film. On the other hand, Utah libraries have the film in their collection, so I see that as a small victory.
Yeah. And that brings us to the third documentary kind of in the series. And I know you've had a lot of other projects kind of circulating around these films. My So-Called Selfish Life, Stomping Jen, is about the child-free choice. So, Therese, I just wanted you to tell us just a little bit about what that means. What is the child-free choice?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because the term child-free is not always clear to people, and what the distinction is between being childless and child-free. It's also not a term that everyone embraces. Some people just don't like labels. Other people don't like the way it sounds, even if they sort of fit that definition. But child-free means that you have chosen not to have children. Like, it is your desire to not have children. It's pretty simple. Like, that's it. Mm-hmm. And childless refers to someone whose desire it is to have children, but for many different reasons, they are not able to. Mm-hmm. So they're very different groups. Although I will say that having spent 5-6 years on this topic at this point, it's really a spectrum. It's not a black and white thing. It's not so easy sometimes to just like separate people on either side of the room. There's a huge gray area of reasons that people do or don't have kids, how they feel about that, how things change over time because we're human, so our feelings can change. So it's more of a spectrum, I would say.
What are for people who might be listening to this who don't know, like what are some of the reasons somebody may decide they don't want to have kids? And by somebody, I mean a woman. Like, what are some of those reasons?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking Stomping Jen
might say something.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever contemplate it?
No.
Okay.
I mean, in the aspect of, as Therese pointed out, like society and culture and like pressure, and so it never really even seemed like not an option, like, but like it was an expectation. I'm curious
because I don't think I asked you this before, or I don't know if I've ever asked you this question. Like, even when you were a younger person, like a teenager, or like, did you ever consider that?
Not having children?
Yeah, like,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I never really thought about, I mean, it was an assumption that you would grow up, get married, have a house, and have kids. Yeah, I don't know. Totally. Like, it wasn't even like a thing that you like sit down and like think about.
Right.
Right. And then, like when we met, like at some point, we were child-free for quite a long time in our relationship. We waited a long time. Yeah.
And I will say the pressure we received was like a glacier grinding over the substrate. It was intense and heavy.
You think?
Absolutely.
Did you feel pressure?
I mean, I had several conversations. We had several conversations with your parents about it, True. And pressuring us to have those kids.
And then it wasn't until our good friend yelled at me that another friend of ours had a child, and she demanded that I get pregnant.
And so, I mean, I know we're laughing about that, but
I mean, it was funny at the time. Yeah. But, like, I listened to her.
But I'm hearing too, like, you never questioned it, and Therese,
no, I never did.
I'm sure your film kind of grapples with this pressure that many women feel from society writ large, or even from people within their own like family units. Like, you have to have kids.
actually several people in the film, me included, talk briefly about how we assumed we would have kids anyway. Even though we didn't want them, we were pretty clear on all of that. We still assumed that we would have them because that's what people did. They had children. And I really, in some ways, lived my life knowing that at some point I would have to do it. And I was trying to get as much life as I could in before I had to do that.
Yeah,
and give up all my hopes and dreams and ambitions and whatever in service to a child and society.
Right. Because that's sort of what it's like. You trade in your own self to have another creature that is dependent on you.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think we live with two young people here in our home, our children, who will, someday, be of an age where they might go off and find partners and be considering this. And I think both of them have said to us at various points, I'm not going to have children. And our answer is always, that's totally fine.
Like, that's your choice.
Right. And it part of it is through, awareness through friendships with somebody like, our friend Chanel Dubofsky, who is a feminist and somebody who writes about this topic. And, I really have tried to take those lessons and, I don't know if saying break the cycle is the right thing, but let them know they have agency,
right.
And it's not our expectation,
right,
that, that they have to have kids.
But I need grandbabies. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, that's it. There's a lot. There's no pressure like family pressure.
Right. For sure.
I think Chanel is one of the people in the film that kind of talks about I just assumed I had to have them, and I was the same way. And that was part of that whole almost midlife crisis of mine. I knew I didn't want kids, but I was sort of unhappy that I didn't have kids,
right?
Because I felt not outside of society or something. And then when I got over that, I thought, oh no, you didn't want kids. You're exactly where you wanted to be. You're good, actually. But it took a little while.
And it was grappling with that kind of in your personal life. What led you to want to make a film about this?
Not at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it did get me interested in this larger thing that I'm interested in, which is the things that we hold sacred about womanhood and how women have to do certain things to fulfill their womanly roles. So it was kind of a piece of this thing that I'm very interested in. But no, I didn't think about doing anything about it, partly because I never talked about it. And I didn't quite have the language to talk about it. It wasn't until my friend Ann Kingston, and she's in the film, she wrote an article about it, I think in 2009, about just the child-free movement, just, hey, some people don't want kids and they're not having them. And she got so much hate mail for it.
Yeah.
She also got people very grateful that she was acknowledging this thing, but she got a lot of hate mail. And she said to me at the time, you really need to make a movie about this. People seem to say this to me, I guess. and I said, I'm very busy right now. I cannot. But that stuck with me. And then when I did start making the film, she was the first person I interviewed.
I'm interested. What kind of hate mail do you like? What is that triggering for people that they would send an author of an article about that hate mail? What are the types of things do you know?
Yeah, sure. It's in the film.
Oh,
it's a segment of the film. We talk about it. No, it's okay. I mean, she's got mail sort of generally people who don't want children are disgusting and selfish and, things like that.
Yeah.
But also, and I find this very hilarious, but somebody wrote, don't go to Anne Kingston's house for Halloween.
Why? She doesn't know how to be a human
in the film. Crazy. And she's like, I don't know, maybe they thought I would serve poison apples, etc.
So, like, was their stance that they thought that she disliked children or hated children that would want to serve them poison apples?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, she didn't even say in the article anything about her own life or her own choices.
That's so interesting.
And she still got like hit with this stuff. So, I mean, she wrote about a lot of very controversial topics. So this was just kind of, this is how it goes. Yeah. But it is kind of, it's fascinating. She actually passed away in 2020, and the film is dedicated to her because I don't think it would have happened without her lovely, gentle, constant nagging to make the film. So I owe a lot of that to her. But yeah, I mean, this is, there's this thing about like, ladies, you have one job. You have one job to do, and you have to do it. Don't be selfish and shirk your responsibilities to create more people who look like the people in power, or create more workers, or stay home and make babies, because you really should not be out in the public sphere. It's really not a good place for the ladies. We would really prefer that you stayed home and stop talking.
Yeah.
I think that that undercurrent is always there. Like, it's just always there. And I think that's why people get the word selfish hurled at them, because we're not giving over our uteruses for the service of someone else, in service of some idea, or in service of capitalism, or in service of nationalism. I mean, I really think that's what's behind it. Yeah. And I think that, when your parents might genuinely want grandchildren, because seeing my parents with their grandchildren, I mean, like, they're pretty awesome, really. But at the same time, there is some idea that it is your duty and your job. And I don't think people even realize that it's a systemic problem, and it bubbles up out of our society and kind of gets into everyone's brains. And you just assume that's how it is. That's how life is. So if you're not doing that, there's got to be something wrong with you.
Yeah, I think like Therese just told us, I was scribbling down kind of what I was hearing, and the economic reasons, right? Political. Therese talked about that. Where we concentrate power in society, right? Stomping Jen, you hold a high level government office, right? There are probably people who are very unhappy about that. That religious, obviously, right? Yeah, and it's easy for men to reinforce this narrative, right? Because men haven't been the ones traditionally burdened with, the consequences of
having a child.
Yeah. I think men get a lot of pressure too to have children. Yeah, I know my husband's talked about it. But, as a whole, I think men, womanhood is synonymous with motherhood still. I don't think that manhood is synonymous with fatherhood in quite the same way. And I don't think that men are judged. Their value is not really judged by them procreating. Maybe getting women pregnant gets them points somehow, but it's just a very different dynamic than for women. And also women are disproportionately, burdened with carrying, birthing, raising children, and are expected to sacrifice to make that happen. And I want to say, like, in case anybody thinks that I'm like judging people who have kids, my sister, who always knew she wanted kids, has two beautiful, beautiful boys who are all grown up adults now. But it's really what she wanted. And she went into it with her eyes open. And she's a fantastic parent, as is her husband. And so I think those are the people who absolutely should have kids. Like, people who are like, yes, I very much want kids and I understand what's involved. And it's going to make me happy. I know it will.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. And what are, for a woman who chooses not to have kids, like what are some of the consequences that society puts upon these folks?
I'm going to say that in some ways, people who choose not to have children and people who just cannot have children for whatever reason, unless you have a heart-to-heart talk with them, you don't quite know why someone doesn't have children. So, one thing I was just reading about this, like an advice column about somebody who has been working a lot of extra hours through the pandemic. And it's something I've heard a lot because she doesn't have, quote unquote, a family. She's been asked to work a lot of extra hours to cover for parents who have been dealing with some serious issues in terms of childcare and work. And but it's not fair that you just assume that your employee without children has nothing else to do in their lives but work extra time. And most of the time, it's not like they're being compensated for it.
Right.
And even if they're being compensated for it, it doesn't feel like a choice they're making. It feels like a foregone conclusion that they're going to do it. So that's one thing. I think women without children are, routinely insulted. I think if you're part of a religious group where having children is important, you are definitely not a part of the community in the way that people with children would be part of the community. Chanel and I have discussed this around synagogues because there's all this life stage stuff. I think in church, any religious sort of community, there are life stage things, and the house of worship, let's say, creates events and programs around all these life stages.
Yes.
There is nothing for the life stage of somebody in their 40s that doesn't have children. It's like nothing for them,
Yeah.
and that's not a good thing. But also, can you imagine being part of a community and your community saying, I'm sorry, we have absolutely nothing for you. We can't even imagine what we could do for you since you haven't followed the, prescribed path.
Yeah.
And I think that's a thing.
Yeah. Are there examples, and I'm fascinated by what thinking, historically or even contemporarily, like who is doing it right? Are there examples, in the anthropological record of societies that like have treated women who make the choice not to have children better than we do now? Are there, societies or religions out there now that do this the right way? Are there things we can point to say this is possible? We don't have to behave this way.
Well, that's actually a really good question. I mean, I'm going to say that on the spectrum of progressive to conservative, the more progressive a society is, the more room I think there is to deviate from the life path we're supposed to take. Yeah. But there were different times historically, even in recent history, where there were these trends of not having children. Sometimes it was because of the economy. The birth rate really dropped in the US in the 20s and 30s precipitously, in part because of the economy, in part because birth control had become a little bit more accessible for women, and partly because of the eugenics movement, actually, and the forced sterilization of a lot of women of color, mostly, and disabled women, and very shining time in our history. So the birth rate dropped, but part of that was just people were like, we're not going to have kids, or we're only going to have one. And all through history, there are times, there is a book, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but a woman wrote a history of this. And she cites a lot of times in history where the birth rate just kind of dropped. I think quite often for economic reasons, but the people would sort of adjust their family size expectations as best they could with whatever contraception they had available. But in Germany, I believe in the 1920s, there was like a big like movement to not have children among some communities. So I don't know if I have a really I don't have a scholarly answer for you, but I do think that things have gone up and down because for various reasons. And the more progressive the society is, chances are the more leeway there is to veer from the path.
Where's the birth rate now? I feel like it's at a low point again. Am I right about that?
Yeah, so the replacement rate is 2.1 children per couple, I guess.
That
I like to say
high.
per uterus. Well, if it's a couple, so if you have two kids for two parents, I guess, you're kind of keeping things like static. If you have 2.1, you're
a little bit,
grow.
That seems like enough.
I have a friend who calls it your carbon footprint. You don't want you just replacing yourself. So if you have more than two, you're increasing your carbon footprint.
But we're like down to more or less 1.7.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The interesting thing, though, I find, there's a long conversation about the fertility rate and what it means, but I think that there is this sort of belief in this magical time when everyone was having 4 or 5 kids, like all in the past, everyone had 4 or 5 kids. But in fact, as I was saying, in the 20s and 30s, the birth rate plummeted. During the baby boom, it did go up pretty high. And then it plummeted again in the 60s and 70s, partly because of the pill, partly because of more women in the workforce having more control, over their bodies, but also about over their economic futures and things like that. In the past 40 years, it hasn't had any really violent up and down movements, which I don't think people don't talk about that. Like, it's been relatively stable for 40 years. It has been stable at a sort of a lower place, like 2.1 and lower, but there's no magical time where, for decades on end, everyone was having 5 kids, at least not in the 20th century.
That's interesting. And you mentioned, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what I had always heard is in the past, right? People had a lot of children because, number one, medical science wasn't very good. So people would die, and also that they were the economic reason, right? They had a farm and they needed labor, and so they would have children, and that would be the workers on the farm would be your kids.
Yeah, I think that was probably certainly true for much of the 19th century. But I think as Therese just told us,
right, in the 20th century,
as we crossed into the 20th century and the what was that?
Industrial Revolution.
Thank you. The Industrial Revolution took hold.
Yeah. And then, they outlawed child labor. And then they introduced child labor laws and all that. All right.
Damn unions.
Well, it's really interesting because this is a sort of a class thing also. And your access, again, to contraception and abortion and having more kids because your kids would get sick and die, or because you needed the labor, to keep things going. But in the mid 1900s, Victorian era, there was this rise of a middle class, and middle class families who had money deliberately chose to have fewer children because they wanted to concentrate their assets on really focus it on a couple of kids and, sort of do the best for them. So middle class and upper class white people tended to have fewer kids. And this was really distressing to politicians, for example, who were very upset about, do you know the term race suicide? White race suicide? It was coined by someone in the late 1900s, but it is still going on today. It is this fear that white people will be replaced by non-white people. And that will be the end of civilization as we know it.
Oh, Jesus.
And like Roosevelt, for example, Teddy Roosevelt was very concerned about white race suicide. And this was when all the immigration was happening from Europe, not from the Northern European clean countries, as it has been described by a certain ex-president, from Central and Southern Europe. And Roosevelt and many others were really distressed about this because these white women were not having enough children. These white women were having a couple kids because they, like I said, they wanted to really consolidate their whatever money they had into raising these children and giving them educations and whatnot. And they didn't want more children. And this was a real issue, and it is still a real issue. I think you can draw a straight line from that till today and all the hand-wringing around the fertility rate. I think in this country and many others, people have very nationalistic reasons for
and it's easy to see that as a motivator for the recent energy around restricting access to abortion and defunding contraception in health insurance companies, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of complicated because many people who seek abortions are women of color or lower income women. So it's a sort of a complicated equation to sort of figure out.
Yeah.
But I do think some of that is just not ceding control of women's bodies, just wanting to keep that under control in whatever way. And again, that's just a constant.
And contraception, like the pill and other forms of contraception, were a real threat to that control, right? And is certainly like in the 70s, and when was it in the 60s and 70s that the pill became available, or was it before then?
It was being tested on Puerto Rican women in the late 50s, early 60s. And then it was released in different states because different states had different laws throughout the 60s. And it was also released only to married women for a while. And I think by 1972, it was available to all women. Even if you were single, you could get it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
And voluntary surgical sterilization has kind of a role in this conversation, I know. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So more and more people, and I'm using the term woman. I like to give this disclaimer. I use woman in a sociological sense, woman as the womanhood equals motherhood. But I also try to talk about people with uteruses because, not all women have uteruses and not all people with uteruses are women. So I would say that people who have the potential to get pregnant do sometimes try to get some kind of sterilization procedure. Not everyone tolerates birth control pills very well. Other methods are sometimes complicated, sometimes not right for someone's body. And so voluntary sterilization has been more and more interesting to people, and younger and younger people as well. That might be, what we call getting your tubes tied, but actually there are different things you do, but you block the fallopian tubes, basically. Or getting your fallopian tubes removed, or getting a hysterectomy, which is when the uterus is removed. All of these things. This is a permanent birth control. It's not really reversible, even though people claim that that it's not really, it's permanent contraception, say. And interestingly, getting a vasectomy is much easier, much faster, less expensive, everything. And a vanishingly small percentage of men get vasectomies, and guys need to step up a little bit.
It's safer too. And we've talked about this. Yeah. I threw my hat into that ring. I got a vasectomy, Stomping Jen, in case you weren't aware.
Thanks.
Yeah. And part of it, Therese, part of it was, and I know I am.
No, I can say, you said to me.
Say something good about me. Please, go ahead.
God. No, you recognized that I had been on birth control for a good portion of my life, and you said I can do this, and I don't want you to have to worry about it. And
so it's my turn to share the burden here. You know, we enjoy intimacy, right? And I said, listen, it's time I pay the fiddler. It's time. So I did it.
It's true. Yes, it happened.
And it was quick. Therese, I'm sure you've seen these operations. This was like an airplane hangar, and they were in and out, turning people around in half an hour.
Yep.
Bag
of ice.
Yeah.
Day recovery.
Yeah, and I have to say, an interesting part of that experience was they wouldn't let me get one without your signature.
Right.
So, and I'm sure if you had gone to get a voluntary sterilization procedure, they would have made me sign something too. Like this idea that because you're married, like you can't make your own choice about that. Yeah. And I think it goes, and I'm trying to throw this idea out there independent of gender. Maybe I shouldn't, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like this idea that I wasn't allowed to make that choice, or Stomping Jen here wouldn't have been allowed to make that choice on her own?
Oh, I have so many thoughts about this. So many thoughts.
Yeah.
Let me first say that to get a medical procedure, you have to be of the age of consent.
Yeah.
So you have to be old enough to consent to any medical procedure. Mm-hmm. And that is the end. That's the end of the story.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the extra hoops you have to jump through are not legal. They are hoops that your medical professionals would like you to jump through. Part of that is because they think you will regret your procedure. They think that you are doing something against the will of your partner, thus preventing you from having more babies. Or you just don't know and you'll change your mind and you'll regret it. And this is the kind of thing that young women hear a lot. Not just young women in their 20s and 30s. If you don't already have children, doctors will tell patients that they have to have X number of children or be X years old in order to have one of these procedures. So that's not the law. That is the preference of the medical professional who's going to perform this procedure. And a lot of the doctors really feel like they don't want to do something that you will regret later. I would like to think that we know our own minds and what we need, but this is a real reality. Like it's actually very hard for women to get their tubes tied, for example, if they don't already have kids. And these rules are presented like the law, and they're not. They're really not the law. They just have to consent. And I know that for vasectomies, you do, if you have a partner of the opposite genitals, I guess I will say, they do want the partner to consent.
Yeah.
So that works both ways. Although it is easier for men to get vasectomies, much easier than for women to get any kind of voluntary sterilization. And there is a woman in our film who is actually 19 seeking a sterilization procedure. And so we sort of follow her a little bit to see what happens with that.
Yeah.
19 is young, but you spend a few minutes with this person in the film and you can see that she knows what she's doing and she knows what she wants. So
Yeah, and this to me says it's really important if you are in a relationship with somebody to talk about this, right? Maybe, before you make begin to start thinking about a long-term commitment, at least begin having these conversations, and if society wasn't such a jerk, people could be more open about it, right?
Yeah, it is actually incredibly important to make sure you're on the same page about this, because it's a profound choice. It's a choice that completely alters your life in ways you can't really undo. And you really should not force someone to have a child. You just cannot force someone to have a child. It's very simple. You cannot force someone to have a child. When people talk about the fertility rate, you cannot force someone to have a child so that someone will get Social Security. You cannot do that.
Right.
It's not right. So, I think this conversation is really important, and I think it should be had early, very early. And I also think that if someone has a conversation with someone they're feeling sort of serious about, and that person says, actually, I don't want children, and you think, oh, they'll change their mind, that's a big mistake. Because they're not going to change their mind. And sometimes they will, because of society's unbelievable and unrelenting pressure, will say, okay, fine, we'll have a child. Not because they want to, but because, their partner does. Sometimes this works out fine. Sometimes it works out horribly. We've just been talking about this on our Facebook page. It's a Facebook page. And our Instagram also, actually. I posted something from an advice column about this very issue.
Yeah, and I just want to tell people we're gonna have the links to all of Therese's social media and web presences related to this project linked in our podcast show notes. So if you're listening to this and you want to go see those things, jump into the show notes, hit the links, and you can go look at those, and then come back to this conversation. But so talk, right? People talk about this. It's really important.
It's not always an easy conversation to have. Yeah. In fact, it can be a very difficult conversation, and especially if you're in a relationship where you really care for each other very much, except for that one thing. Yeah. I think it's a very difficult thing to talk about, but ultimately, if your partner doesn't want a child and you do, it's not going to end well. No. Yeah. It just isn't. It's too big of a thing.
Yeah. And what kind of resources are available to people who are either women who find themselves, realizing, I may not want to have a child, or like we were just talking about, couples who need to potentially have these conversations? Are there resources available to people to explore this in a little more depth?
I think there are boundless resources at this point. You just have to find the kind of resources that fit your own temperament, let's say. I think not everyone likes the label child-free, but it sure is good to search with. So if you do #child-free on any social media, you will bring up countless pages, accounts, conversations. There's a whole thing on Reddit. There's a lot. There is on our website, we have a resource page, so we list a lot of different kinds of resources. But you have to find the vibe that fits you, because it can range from sort of very helpful grown-up conversations about it to fairly toxic environments. But that's kind of the internet. I think I could talk about any subject and you would find that range. But yeah, #child-free, roam around and see, as I said, we have My So-Called Selfish Life Facebook page. We try to keep things friendly and informative. And there are a lot of other accounts like ours too. So there is a lot. People stumble onto it and they're like, oh, I didn't even know people are talking about this, or I didn't even know this was a thing. And I like every couple of weeks, someone will say that to me, like, oh, I had no idea. this was here. I had no idea it was an option. So we just want people to have options. Honestly, I feel like such a scold, but it's not. It's just, I think people should have options in their lives, especially for some of the most profound decisions they're going to make.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the film, My So-Called Selfish Life, which grapples with this topic we've been discussing. Can you just tell us a little bit about how would you describe the film to somebody who is listening to all of this and is interested in the film? What are they going to get when they sit down to watch My So-Called Selfish Life?
So, like my other films, I want to say that this is a very thought-provoking film. It is also a very entertaining film. I really believe in using comedy to talk about things that are difficult to talk about. Mm-hmm. So I guarantee you will find this film very entertaining. The film is, on the basic level, it's just exploring and validating the choice to be child-free as one of the many options we should have in our lives. And there are like really fantastic people in the film talking about their own experiences, including Chanel, who we've been mentioning, who's fantastic in the film. On another level, though, it dissects the social forces at play to make this choice so stigmatized and to make motherhood feel like the one inevitable path for your life, that, one job you have to do. So it's kind of working on two levels. Mm-hmm. We look at a lot of pop culture. There's a lot of pop culture in this film and the subtle ways that we get that kind of messaging, history, politics. So it's a lot of different ways of telling that story. And we just had our premiere about a month ago, actually. And people were like, "Oh, I didn't know I needed this film, but I do."
I'm going to give you one of these for the premiere. So how can people see the film? How do we see it if we wanted to go watch it tonight? Could we? Is there a way to see it?
Well, let me answer that this way. It just premiered at a film festival about a month ago, so it's still in its festival phase. So it's going to be in its festival phase for several months, if not longer. So it's not publicly released yet. However, if you happen to be in an area where it's playing in a film festival and they are streaming at that festival, which has become very common pandemic times, you can see it.
Yeah, and people are going to be listening to this probably. So if you're hearing this now, you could be listening to this 5 years from now. So I guess what I'm trying to say is go to the website, right? Go to
go to the website to figure out how to see this film.
So there are two websites I'm going to direct people to. There's myselfishlife.com.
That's the one.
Yep. And then there's also trixiefilms.com. You could probably find your way to, if you're listening to this and it's still in festival release, go to those websites and you can probably find your way to a place you could see the film.
Great.
Yeah. If you go to myselfishlife.com on the homepage, you can get to our upcoming screenings and events. And the best thing to do, though, which I tell everyone, is we have the first to know list, as we call it, which will guarantee you will be literally the first to know of opportunities to see the film. It's basically a mailing list, but it's a very useful one. And you can sign up for that on our website as well on the homepage.
Cool.
And this is what I'm getting emails from Denmark and the Netherlands and like, how do I see your film? And I'm like, please sign up for this list. You will literally be the first person to know where it's playing at the moment.
I'm signing us up for the list, Stomping Jen.
Yes, sign up. Parents have said nice things about the film. I'm very happy to report. So,
what about your other films? Is there a way to stream those, or are they available somewhere?
I know that both films are on Canopy, which you can get through your public library if it's happening in your region for free.
Yeah, we do have that service.
If you have Canopy, you can watch my other two films. At trixiefilms.com, we have a page for each of my films, and there are links on each of those pages on how you can watch them. So there are different links to different things.
Cool.
But that's like the best way to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. I think there are links on the homepage also from My So-Called Selfish Life to get to these films.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other really interesting content up there. In the last week or so, I've been kind of cruising around Therese's websites, and there's a lot of interesting stuff to look at there. They're well designed too. They're nice to look. Your websites are really nice to look at. That has to be the graphic designer in you, right?
Thank you, art school education.
Yeah.
No, thanks. Yeah, I'm messing with them all the time, but yeah. They're good. Can I plug one specific favorite thing on their website?
Yeah.
Of course.
On mySoCalledSelfishLife.com, we have something called Child Free Comics. This was a project I did with Allison Schwed, who's a just fantastic cartoonist. And we collaborated on this, and it's basically like a web comic about the child-free world. It's like a introduction to being child-free. And a lot of it came from, we did this before the film was done, but a lot of it came from the research from the film and some of the characters in the film, in fact. So check that out. It's really cool. I'm really proud of it. And it's very enjoyable because Allison is such a great artist. Her stuff's beautiful.
We'll check that out. What were some of the challenges in getting this film made? And I'm going to remind you, I don't know anything about filmmaking. So I imagine there's all of the challenges related to like making a movie, like any kind of movie, right? Like all the production stuff, the funding stuff. Did you, in my mind, you must have met some kind of resistance from outward forces. Like, don't you make this film because you're going to tip over that sacred cow over there.
Well, I think that with this film, actually, yes, many grant makers resisted giving us money. Yes.
I love the way you put that.
in some ways, because I don't think they thought anyone would be interested in the film, which they're very wrong about. So funding is always hard. Any independent filmmaker will tell you that raising the funds for a film is just ridiculously difficult. And, films cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. To $1 million, really. The stuff you see on Netflix are probably $1 million films. And but for independent filmmakers like me, it is really hard to raise money. We had a Kickstarter, and then we did get some arts grants. Thank you, Canada Council for the Arts. But it's an ongoing struggle, and you want the film to move forward. So you're just paying for stuff because you want it to keep moving forward. But a lot of it, comes out of your own pocket, and you hope you'll make that back in distribution. Yeah. But generally speaking, I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure other filmmakers can relate to this. You can't take on a project like this unless you're absolutely obsessed with the topic. Yeah. Because it's so hard. You're just not going to want to do it unless you have like an obsession with telling this story in some way. And that's the horrible trap you get into. You make a film. You're stuck making a film. But in terms of other resistance, I did get resistance from people who I wanted to be in the film. I did, I spoke to a lot of people off the record, and a lot of those people did not want to be in the film because they weren't, and I'm going to quote them, they were not out to their families as child-free. Wow. Interesting. There's a lot of pressure, and this is usually sort of like a cultural issue. They weren't out to their families. Let's say they were married, and they would be telling their families that they're really trying, but nothing's happening. Isn't that tragic? And they're not trying at all, but they cannot say that. They just can't, and they certainly do not want to be in a film where they're going to talk about it. Yeah. So there was a lot of reticence among certain groups of people where having children is you just can't say you don't want to have them.
Yeah, that's so heartbreaking to hear. That's just like incredibly heartbreaking to hear that somebody has this, important story to tell, right? And could be part of telling this story and helping lift up, collectively the voices of women who've made this choice and that they can't. Do you know what I mean? Like just,
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I don't even know why anyone wants to be in a documentary, honestly. Like, you really have to trust your filmmaker to take your story and your life and treat it with respect and authenticity. So I don't know why anybody would do it. I'm very grateful.
How do you convey that trust to people? Like how do you let them know you can trust me?
Well, I think that there are like different ways. There are some people who just really want to tell their story. And the fact that I'm child-free, very vocally child-free, makes a big difference because I'm sort of dealing with the same stuff they are in some ways. I'm not just like trying to pick up on a trend, and make a film about it. But I think there are a lot of ways to do it. And I think you have to put in the time to build that trust, because by the time you're giving them the release form to sign, they should be feeling very comfortable with that. Conversations, showing them previous work I've done. It's good to be on social media, obviously, because they can scroll through years of social media on the topic. Chanel's one of the first people I spoke to when I was thinking of making this film. I took her out for lunch. I didn't really know her, actually. I just knew her work. And she was gung-ho. Like, she was ready to go. She goes, I've been waiting for you to show up on my doorstep and ask me what I think. But for some other people, it just took a little bit of time. Like any relationship and like any consent relationship, frankly, you have to build the level of trust that will lead to someone's consent to be in the film. So I mean that's basically, I think, the process. I am really grateful to people who did give us that trust. And I also completely understand why some people didn't want to do it. And I mean, I was disappointed, but I get it. I so get it.
Yeah.
I learned something from them anyway, but I get it.
Has any organizations out there protested the film or anything like that? I actually,
there have been some articles about the film that have completely misrepresented what we're doing, of course. But I don't think the film is really known enough yet. It just premiered and it's not available publicly. So I think when we have our public release, which will probably be in 2022, early 2022 sometime, I think that will like raise its profile considerably. I have for the Virginity film, I did get requests for interviews from like these very conservative student newspapers, because I was screening at a lot of colleges, and there were people who were very upset about a film called How to Lose Your Virginity screening on their campus. So I did do a bunch of interviews with people who, did not approve in any way. And their big thing was to get me to admit I was a feminist, which I always feel is really funny. Like there's like, folks at home cannot see, there is a sign behind me, and it's all over my websites. And but that was a big get for them. Therese Schecter, filmmaker, who claims she is a feminist. So there's that kind of stuff. Now it's sort of like Therese Schecter, filmmaker, who is anti-natalist. I don't want anyone to ever have children, which that's not actually true.
What does that mean to you, to be a feminist? Like, what is that? I'm sure that word invokes all sorts of images for all different types of people. Like, what does it mean to you to embrace that?
Oh man, that's a hard question to ask me late at night.
Sorry.
I mean, I think of what feminism did for me in my own life, and what it meant as I was figuring out who I was and what was important to me and what my place in the world was, and honestly, what my ability to do things was, and sort of freed me from a lot of ideas that, again, are in this soup that we are all boiling in. it made me question things. It made me feel free to express things that weren't necessarily popular opinions. It's in all of my films. It is a part of my mission. The word feminist, like so many words, can be contentious, but for me, it just shaped the way I look at the world and the way I see things that I think are not right with the world. And it's just a framework to understand a lot of social systems that frankly hurt people very much.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what it means to me.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So I want to ask you another kind of big picture question, I guess.
No. Yeah.
What does it mean to get this film out there and help other women who've made the child-free choice, like be seen and heard? And I know this is an obvious question, but I'm just wondering.
It's an obvious question.
I'm wondering what it means to you to be able to do this.
I feel like any answer I give you is going to sound really grandiose.
It's a grandiose question, so it would be appropriate. Yeah.
Look, I'm glad that I will play some part in asking people to think about things that they may not have thought about before, or validating things they have thought about but could not say out loud. I think those are both really important things. I'm glad I'm moving the conversation forward, and also I'm really glad that I'm able to put something that feels very personal in a much larger context, in the context of the way the world works and all the different systems of the world and all the different oppressive systems of the world. So I am glad that I can do that in a way that actually people find entertaining and they stay and watch because they're being entertained, and maybe sort of having some things to think about when they leave. I guess that's what I feel like a lot of filmmakers who do sort of social issue films will tell you the same thing. They want people to consider things that they may not have been considering before and see the world in ways they may not have been seeing it before. And that's just, that's also what I think, art does for people as well.
Yeah.
I love it.
So I guess that's my goal. But, we're actually starting to do a lot of private screenings with organizations. And we're sort of creating an impact plan where we can show the film, have a discussion guide, give people conversations to think about. And as we go along with this, hopefully make some larger changes. I think, for example, we talked about sterilization. I think that sterilization should be considered a reproductive right, not just something that like these weird girls keep asking for. Mm-hmm. It is a reproductive right. It should be talked about in the same way as having access to contraception, having access to abortion. It's kind of the same, but it's not thought about that way. And I don't feel like repro rights organizations are out there demanding this yet.
Yeah.
But it would be nice if that happened. But, a lot of things like that.
Yeah. So I know you're going to be focused on My So-Called Selfish Life for a while. I'm starting to get a sense of what it takes to bring a film into the world, and I think you'll be working on this for a while. Have you begun to think about what might be next for you in film? Has an idea germinated anywhere? Have you?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, are you willing to share it, or?
Yeah, I think so. My husband teases me like that I should write a letter to myself and seal it in an envelope to be opened if I feel like making another film.
Oh.
Like, stop. Don't you remember?
Right.
That kind of thing. Well, I think it's a kind of a very natural progression. I made a film about virginity and I made a film about motherhood. And I think the end of that trinity is, I think we call it the crone. So I think I have to make a film about menopause.
Oh. I mean,
I thought that was only for when I said fuck. Like,
no,
I didn't know that there are other ways to get
anything you get.
Anything I get excited about. I mean,
Thank you.
I think that's a great idea. I don't think I've ever seen a film that attempts to kind of address that topic.
You know what would be a great topic?
What?
I mean, along these lines, right? Miscarriages.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've talked about this, that I had a miscarriage, and I didn't realize how many women actually have miscarriages because nobody talks about it. And a lot of women have miscarriages.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I mean, there are a lot of things we're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
We're just not allowed. And I think miscarriages is definitely one. Infertility in general is something that's still sort of taboo to talk about in some ways, even though a lot of people are doing, IVF, but it's still not, there's still, I don't know, I haven't had this experience, but there is a sense of sort of failure, I think, which is ridiculous, but,
or like shame or guilt, like I did something to cause this. Yeah. Or there's something wrong with me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I think there are a lot of, so I don't know exactly, but if I'm following the female,
yes, you are,
right.
I love that
maiden mother crone thing.
I love that.
Then that would be next. Nobody else do it, okay? Because it's going to take me like 5 years.
Nobody steal the idea.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. Because I'll wait for your film. I'm not going to say anything. So
I can't guarantee I'm going to make it. I'm trying to retire, seriously.
Okay.
But I don't know.
I just wanted to ask you about a couple of your other projects. I mentioned I was perusing through your websites, and could you just tell us a little bit about the Vcard Diaries project? That looked super interesting to me. I was like, I need to go check this out.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking about it. So the Vcard Diaries is an interactive story sharing project, which is still live. So anyone can go check it out at vcarddiaries.com. It was a companion to How to Lose Your Virginity. In making the film, people were constantly sending in stories about their own, we call them sexual debuts and deferrals. So it was sort of all of the spectrum of the word virginity has no real definition, by the way. So I'm just going to use that term very loosely. Okay. But how people were quote unquote losing virginity or not. So I decided that I should put it into a website so people could like easily access all these stories, and it's searchable by topic, searchable by gender. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can search for these stories, and they're very short. They're like a couple paragraphs. But I was really fortunate to get into a program that POV, which is a part of PBS, POV was doing something called the Pov Hackathon, and they paired filmmakers with programmers to build an interactive project over a weekend, which we did. Wow. At least the first iteration of it, which was great. It was so awesome, actually, to be able to work with people who knew how to build things like this and make them work and look good. And so they grew out of there, although I worked with some other folks to get it to where it is now. But yeah, so once in a while, I still get people sending in stories years after, almost 10 years after it was launched. So it's kind of cool. But I think the idea, like one of the overarching ideas in How to Lose Your Virginity was there's no real definition for virginity. And so you can define it for yourself. Saying that it's like penis and vagina sex is a very narrow, limiting way to talk about sex. Do I get a thing for that? No?
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I'm making
slow on the uptake.
Yeah.
So we were really interested in all the different sort of milestones you could have, all the different kinds of virginities you could lose. We were giving out these V cards with like little, like those coffee cards, every time you have a coffee, you
gets like a punch
card. Punch card, exactly.
Yeah.
So we have these punch cards that are like Vcard, reusable Vcards, I think we call them, and they had cherries all along the bottom, and you had 10 of them, so you could sort of keep track of all of the different like sexual milestones that you had hit, which was free for you to decide what those were.
Oh, that's such an interesting idea.
Yeah.
It was cool. It was very popular. It was really popular when I was doing screenings at colleges. Like people were really into it. We just give them away. But the Vcard Diaries also celebrates that. It celebrates the many ways people have sort of decided that they have become sexual in some way. Obviously, there are stories from people who are queer who are not having penis and vagina sex. But a lot of different things, and people who have not really had any sexual experience also.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
I'm going to go check that out. I was like,
out.
I have to look at that. I'm going to go spend some time reading. I might submit a story.
I can't imagine what story you're going to submit.
You could totally, and I just want to say, like, I'm really proud of that project, and it ended up being the Kinsey Institute has an art show every year. Like they used to anyway, and it was at the Kinsey Institute as part of the show, and it was the first interactive piece that they had ever included in an exhibit.
That's awesome.
There you go.
That's amazing.
That was really cool. And like being at the Kinsey Institute and getting to look at all their like archives and things, I was just like geeking out the whole time.
That's cool.
So that was fun.
So the last question, I think, directly about you and what you do, I wanted to ask. I was so delighted to see that you're a sibling podcaster, and you do a show called Downton Gabby. It's a podcast about the TV show Downton Abbey and pop culture created by and about women. Can you talk to us just a little bit more about the podcast you co-host?
Yeah, so the podcast is no longer active, although it's very easy to find.
Okay.
So all of our years of episodes are there. We started, so it's me, Shannon Bowen, and Brandy Sperry, and we met on Twitter because we were all like freakishly excited about the first season of Downton Abbey, and we were like talking. I didn't know them at all. They live on the West Coast. And so at some point, after so many conversations about whatever was happening that week on Downton Abbey, Shannon said, let's do a podcast. So this is 2011, I guess, when back in the old days of podcasting.
You were a trailblazer.
Yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but we started doing a podcast, which, by the way, the first couple of years, the audio is so terrible. I just apologize in advance. I beg you to just power through it because it's good. So we would talk about every episode as it aired. This was a seasonal podcast, let's say. So after every episode aired, the three of us would get together and talk about it. And we come from interesting disciplines, so we could bring like different sort of viewpoints about it from a screenwriting point of view. And I was working on How to Lose Your Virginity at the time, so I had a lot to say about the sort of sexual dynamics on that show. And especially when Lady Mary buys a diaphragm.
Yeah.
So there was a lot to discuss about that. Yeah. And then in the sort of off season, we would do shows about other media by and about women, TV shows and films and things. It all exists on the TrixieFilms.com website, actually.
Oh, cool.
It was great. It was really, really great. After Downton Abbey ended, we did do a few seasons on other similar topics. And then we decided that it had kind of run its course for us. We reunited when the Downton Abbey movie came out.
Oh, that's awesome.
To do a special podcast about the movie. And I don't know if there's another Downton Abbey movie coming. I'm going to try and convince Shannon and Brandy to reunite again.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
I bet your fans will go crazy. There was a podcast I used to love right around like 2013. It ran for a few years called The Bigfoot Show. Don't ask. It's about Sasquatch.
Don't ask.
Yeah.
But it's very self-explanatory.
I loved these three people who did this podcast, and then like they stopped doing it for a while, and then like a year would go by and they would put out an episode and I would lose my shit. Like when I saw that episode, I was like, oh my God, they recorded an episode. And it would just be like a gift dropped down from the heavens for
so
me.
Funny.
Anyways, so I'm sure people will love that if you are able to get it together.
I'd love to do it. And we do occasionally hear from people who are rewatching the series along with the podcast, which is also really nice to hear. But we described it as funny, feminist, and foul-mouthed. So
yeah, I love it.
Get that idea.
Yeah.
We swore a lot. Some people were not happy with the language. We got comments about
the language.
But, they can go fuck themselves.
Yeah,
right?
All those proper people drinking their tea and listening to the podcast. Therese, I wanted to ask you before we'll transition into our last two questions. Was there anything else related to my so-called selfish life, your film that's out there right now? Anything else you wanted to talk to us about, or anything else related to your other projects?
I'm sure I'm going to think of something in an hour and go, why didn't I talk about that? No, I just, it's a word of mouth film. I really would love people to check it out. I really do think it's the film you don't know that you need until you watch it and realize how much you actually need it. Mm-hmm. And then you can tell your friends and family about it. So please get on our list and we will let you know as soon as you can see it. Oh, there is one other thing. I don't know when this is running, but we're doing a very special event in early December. Is that?
I think I have it written here.
It's on the front page.
So this is more towards the end of December.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me tell you about this great event we had in early December. We wanted to sort of appease our hungry fans, and so in the past we did an event with showing a couple clips from the film and doing a little panel, doing a virtual event.
Ooh.
It was really fun. And it was basically how to survive the holidays as a child-free person between Thanksgiving and the December holidays. We're going to be sort of framing things that way and doing some advice so people in the audience can put in their Q&As and things. But sorry, you missed it. But maybe we'll do another one.
Yeah, I love that. That is awesome. And that's in that time of year, people may really be feeling those social pressures.
Yeah, for
right?
sure. There's a lot of holiday gatherings of family, and
it could probably really use that kind of that support and solidarity from the community. So I love that.
We want to give that support and also like laugh a lot about it, about Aunt Joyce and why she always asks what's happening with the babies. So yeah.
Just a million people popped into my head, like generic Aunt Joyces. So I saw them come through like flashcards.
Oh my god!
All the Aunt Joyces in my life. Okay, Therese, what do you like to do for fun? So you're not making films, you're not graphic designing. What do you like to do just for yourself?
Well, this is very kind of basic, but I like baking a lot.
Ooh.
I really like baking.
Fun.
I love having a leisurely day to bake, like not having to fit it into some schedule, but just being able to take my time and do something super complicated and like really enjoy it. I love being at the beach. Again, it sounds like some kind of dating thing. I really like going to the beach.
I love the beach.
It's your
I'm
favorite
a Jersey girl.
Yeah, I love the Rockaways. My husband and I go to the Rockaways.
Nice.
what else do I like to do? I very much enjoy musical theater. And
perfect.
I enjoy singing musical theater, even though I don't have much of a voice. But again, this is something that my husband and I bonded over when we first met.
Nice.
So musical theater.
Nice.
Is Hamilton musical theater?
Yeah,
I like that.
Sure. That's like the only thing you like.
No, you took me to that thing with those people.
Moulin Rouge.
Yes, that was good. There's a lot of people dancing around in very suggestive ways.
Yeah. We're pretty old school. Like my favorite musicals are like 50s to 70s kind of. So I have that sort of, you would call it
Oh, I was just going to say that. Remember we went to see Oklahoma in college?
Oh my God.
We saw Oklahoma.
That's my husband. Do you want to join us? Yeah, Oklahoma's, I've been singing Oklahoma since I was a youngster. So we do these show tune parties. Well, pre-pandemic, we were doing show tune parties where we got all our friends together and would sing around the piano.
Oh, that's super fun.
That sounds like a blast.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
I like really fun.
Les Mis and Cats and Evita is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
And Peter Pan.
You like that one too?
Oh my gosh, with who played Wendy? It was like Mary Martin or something. Played Peter Pan.
She played Peter Pan.
Yeah, it's like one of my favorite soundtracks from when I was a kid.
We'll have to watch it sometime.
I don't know that you can watch it, but
okay.
I had it on cassette.
I bet you could find it somewhere.
Yeah, maybe.
I bet you could. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
I'll let you go. Last question.
Yeah.
If you listen to the Chanel podcast, you might know this one's coming. This question. We ask this of everyone. So, what have you?
I just want to ask: can you hear the sirens outside the window and the piano playing in the apartment building?
No, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Brooklyn.
Yeah. What have you experienced that you can't explain? You could take this question anyway.
Wow. I don't remember you asking Chanel that question.
We might not have because we've had Chanel on multiple times.
Oh.
So we might have skipped
Did we let her off the hook?
It might have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's okay. We do usually ask this question. I promise.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a you question.
Okay. This is with apologies to my husband. I'm going to say that one of the things that I can't explain is how happy I am just sitting next to him holding his hand.
Oh. We're both like racing for the button.
Yeah.
Oh,
no, really.
So
I can't explain it in any way except that it just makes me incredibly happy.
Oh, that's super sweet. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
All right. Therese Schecter, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. I got my skin tingled several times. That's a good sign.
That's great.
Ooh.
That's always a good sign.
Mm-hmm. I think it's just because you're sitting next to me.
Wow.
Sorry.
Yes. Say yes.
Yes. Yesterday was our 20th wedding anniversary.
It's true.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. 25 years together?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and here we are.
Yeah.
Still hanging out together.
That's right.
Chatting it up.
That's right. Thank you, Therese.
Therese, thank you. Really, I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation with you and continue the conversation that we, had started with Chanel, kind of about women and the child-free choice, and your film, My So-Called Selfish Life, which is kind of a fulcrum for both of these conversations. So, thank you so much. And people listening to this, I said it before, I demand that you go check out Therese's websites. All right. There's TrixieFilms.com. There's MySelfishLife.com. There's the Facebook page. There's an Instagram profile.
There's lots of stuff out
there. There's
a
Twitter. There's even a Vimeo.
You cannot say you can't find it.
Right. And because I'm going to put the links in the show notes.
There you go.
So you can't say you can't find it.
That's right.
All right. So go check this stuff out. Seriously. And there's a lot.
A great trailer on the website. Go watch the trailer. It's good.
Yes. Yep. Watch the trailer. Check out some of these other projects we talked about. There's a lot here. And Therese, thank you for tackling these subjects and bringing them to us. You know, I really value people like you in society who challenge us to really think about things that are important. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really delightful. I really enjoyed talking to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right.
That's really great.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And all right, so listeners, I'm just going to finish up by saying if you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe, download our episodes. We like that. Share with a friend. That's important too, right? Word of mouth.
Yes.
And finally, if you feel compelled, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Yeah, okay?
You can do it.
All right.
All right.
So this is the point where we just go around. We say goodbye, right, Stomping Jen?
Yeah, I think we have reached that point.
Okay. Therese, would you like to say goodbye?
Goodbye. I feel like I should be singing Sound of Music right now.
There you go. There you go.
I'm just going to say goodbye, and thank you so much for listening.
Thanks. Stomping Jen, I'm going to give you the final goodbye.
Well, now Therese has that song in my head from, isn't it like goodbye, auf Wiedersehen? I don't know the words.
All right, I'm going to say goodbye, then you're going to go out on that. Goodbye.
There you go. Bye now.
I'm conducting. Go ahead.
I don't know the words.
Goodbye, 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 goodbye,
right,
goodbye, 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 goodbye.
This world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate. Those who have freedom will understand also its heavy responsibility. That all who are insensitive to the needs of others will learn charity, and that the sources, scourges of poverty, disease, and ignorance will be made disappear from the earth. And that in the goodness of time, all peoples will come to live together in a peace guaranteed by the binding force of mutual respect and love. I shall never cease to do what little I can to help the world advance along that road.